Theodore N. Louckes, Louckes, of 260 Joyce Court, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Ted's phone number is area code 313-540-6036. He also works at Centricast at 1000 North Updike in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Phone there, 313-370-0310. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw in Ted's office at 1000 North Updike in Auburn Hills on June 17th, 1992. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes.
Ted Louckes, and I live in Bloomfield Hills at 260 Joyce Court, and I work at Centricast Incorporated, which is 1000 North Updike in Auburn Hills, and my home phone number is 313-540-6036, and my business number is 313-370-0310.
Okay, Ted. Now, if you could just start us back to when you started and what you were doing and what was happening, and we'll come forward from that.
Well, when I was a senior in high school, which was in 1948 in Lansing, I applied for General Motors Institute, and I was very fortunate to be accepted. And also, I asked the personnel department if I could have a summer job in lieu of my going to school that fall. So the day after I graduated high school, I walked down from my home to the gate into the Oldsmobile with my lunch pail, delighted and happy that I was going to be in the automobile business, all excited about it, and I was employed as a person hanging fenders on the body hardware line in the old final assembly building upstairs. So I started in June of 1948, the day after I left high school. So you couldn't hardly have a career start sooner than that. And I went on, of course, through GMI. But in the meantime, while I was in GMI, the Korean War took place, so I volunteered to the Air Force, which took 4 years of sabbatical in the middle of my school, and came back as a junior, and completed the GMI and after that episode, and spent the rest of my career in the product engineering department. I was very fortunate in that era, of course, to have been mentored by many great engineering people and leaders and managers, and I had the opportunity to work in almost every area of engineering, and I, needless to say, groomed me very well as a automotive engineer, and was fortunate enough to allow me to become chief engineer before I retired.
Ted, do you remember what you started doing when you first came back after GMI was all over?
After I graduated?
Yeah, after you graduated.
Well, I worked in the experimental lab,
okay,
which was traditional at that time.
All right.
Designing and building and running test apparatuses for all kinds of components and engines, and running a dynamometer, and all the things that a young engineer hands-on needed to do to begin to get a taste of what real automotive engineering was doing. Of course, as a GMI student, I worked in various departments of engineering for the last 2 years when they allowed me to specialize for product engineering. That was a big, exciting thing, too, because they were rather rare selections at that time to be able to come into product engineering.
Had you had interest in that from the onset?
Oh, there was no question in my mind. That was the only goal I had. And to have not been able to do that would have been a major disappointment. So I worked on the drafting board, everything from putting part numbers on finished drawings to making simple designs and design analysis and chassis, body, and powertrain.
Okay, that's
And
part of
so,
the GMI.
yeah, so I had design activities while I was a student, and then I went right into the experimental department, which was a tradition at that time. And of course, within a year, I had moved out of the experimental department, became an experimental test engineer. And
This would have been about like 19.
Well, that would be in the late 50s, and
7 or 8.
yeah, that would have been in the late 50s
Okay.
because I got my degree after my 5th year project, I think in 1957.
Okay.
So then I went. I had some extensive experience of sort of leading test trips all over the world for a few years. Then I was assigned.
Sure. What kinds of things?
We went. Took groups of cars down into southern Mexico and did all kinds of hot fuel testings and high altitude testing. Then we spent time up in northern United States and in Canada in the winter to do cold testing and all kinds of cross-country evaluations from coast to coast, brake testing, general vehicle evaluations in all kinds of climates. We did development trips for developing air conditioning and automatic air conditioning systems. And in that era, we were doing Air Ride, which was a big project. Yes. And then I got assigned as sort of the resident engineer out the Desert Proving Grounds for a couple of years, doing cooling and air conditioning and other kinds of hot weather development testing, including trying to resolve a lot of hot weather problems with the Air Ride system. Which we did finally resolve a year after it was in production, which was too bad. 1 year later, it would have been a great success. And then I was sort of made the first resident engineer at the Desert Proving Grounds, and I spent the major part of a couple of years out there. At that time, we didn't do year-round operations there, but I spent a major part of the year, say from May until October, running all our activities out there. Then I was assigned as a proving ground manager at Milford. Okay. And then superintendent of proving grounds and garage and shops. In that year, how did the Oldsmobile fit into the proving ground? Well, we were quite an independent operation at that time. Each of the divisions had their own shops, their own protocols for testing. Although there were some similarities in the general durability kinds of things, most everything was done based on our own engineering testing procedures and development procedures. So the experiment. Critical than like Chevrolet or Pontiac, or can you share with us the? Oh yes, we had extremely high standards in terms of acceptance and development and durability and the various kinds of qualification testing. Matter of fact, one of the things that I think was a small chink in the armor of Oldsmobile that occurred as a result of corporate edict was the so-called General Motor Uniform Test Standards. Okay. And I was the first member of that committee that was trying to do that, and it was very hurtful and painful to me to see us lower our standards to what I call the lowest common denominator in the corporation, which is exactly what happened. And as the years went on, later on in our many of the product problems that I saw were the result of lowering the standards that Oldsmobile used to maintain. We had a discipline that said our car, based on the way we did business, our cars were going to outlast, outrun, have higher performance standards than others, and it was what our customers found in the marketplace. We didn't need to tell them; they found it out themselves. But as the years went on, we tried to work around the GM uniform test standards and still keep our products at a higher level of engineering endeavor. But that eroded over the years, and after the traditional people who had been there all of that historical way of doing things began to be less influential, and be less of them had faded into the background. When did that standardization sort of start? It took place in the early 60s, in the mid 60s, and it took effect in the middle and late 60s, and began to influence our products as we went through the 70s, heavily influenced them. And I mean, we had all kinds of standards, whether it was the cool down for the air conditioning system in the car, whether it was the warm up for the heater system, whether it was the defroster performance, whether it was just plain old durability, whether it was the loading in the steering system, or whether it be our ability to go through chuck holes, or whether it were just plain Belgian blocks, all of those things. Extremely high standards, and the philosophy at the time was it was more than the customer need, we shouldn't do that. But that wasn't really true. The customers found value in those things, and were proved over the years. Our reputation, it used to be salesmen bought our cars because they knew they were going to last twice as long as everybody else's, and so there must have been something to that. And the individual expertise that was developed in our engineering department was so strong compared to others. We had the best chassis engineers, the best heating and cooling engineers, and of course our powertrain people were without peer and hardly anywhere in the world. And this was true throughout the whole organization.
Any particular thing you can share with us on why that might have happened?
Why we were better?
Yeah.
Well, I think there was a heritage that Oldsmobile was led by technical people. We had general managers and chief engineers who were the regular path to success in that organization was up through the technical organization. And I guess I was the last chief engineer to never become general manager. Mm-hmm. So I was the first failure.
If you call that a failure.
Yeah. Not really. I guess you could say that, of course, Bob Gershimer got switched away too. And so I wasn't the last chief engineer to not become general manager, but I guess I was sort of felt that way.
Okay.
So, that was the knowledge and the career path that seemed to drive the kind of company ours were. And you see some other companies around the world that have those kinds of heritage. Certainly the kinds of people who manage Mercedes-Benz, the kind of people who manage Honda, BMW, those are strong technical organizations, and it reflects itself in their products.
It was the fact that we were, 85 miles from Detroit, did that have anything to do with that?
Well, it used to, until the last few years. We spent all our time running down there and listening to what they wanted us to do. I think that we were quite independent, and we did things in our own way. And just to do it your own way and to be different isn't necessarily a success pattern, but we did them well. Yeah. That was the key thing. We had extremely strong mentoring from the engineering expert, the people with experience and the people who were responsible for the departments and the managers. They cultured their young engineers to learn the important things. They passed on their experience to you. Mm-hmm. And there's a great lack of that going through the industry now. There's too many holes where they can't pass any experience on. But also there's no feeling that you're going to be there for your whole life, and you want to make sure that what you know goes to the next generation. People are managing their careers to succeed wherever the hell it is. They're not worried about succeeding at Oldsmobile or anything like that. They're going to run their career portfolio in any direction that's successful. We didn't feel that way. We were all dedicated to that company and to the success of that company. And with that success, we felt personal success. Yeah. So there's, I think I have a clear picture of that, and a lot of that is going to be hard to find in the future, unfortunately. I kind of like the way our agency is advertising this intelligent engineering thing, because that reflects a little bit on what we really used to be. Yeah. And I would hope they could restore that somehow, because there's got to be some real essence behind that. It can't be a job shop engineering and call it the intelligent engineering. It's got to be something real. I hope that there's some way to reinstate that the management of the division can find a way.
See, Ted, when we went through this, the period of the 60s and that kind of thing, we were in what I call the high performancer. Everybody was making big engines and going like mad. Can you share with us how that was happening and what was going on there in product?
Well, of course, most engineers love that sort of thing. I mean, we love performance. We loved cars that went fast, cars that handled well, and so the whole muscle car era, the era of big engines, high horsepower, was a stimulating, fun time for us, and we had a lot of very, very good expertise in that, and we used to get great pleasure out of putting together pseudo race cars and dragsters and helping people in the racing venue and occasionally setting a record here or there. Matter of fact, I was involved in most all of those from the 60s on up, including their world record climb at Pikes Peak with the first Tornado. That was one of my projects. I went up that hill with Bobby Unser and that thing in a raging snowstorm. It was the damnedest thing you ever saw. We had the back wheels hanging off in space occasionally. And we did many other projects like that. Of course, we had some
precipitated, in other words, thought up those kinds of things.
Well, I don't know. We all had a mind for it. And, I guess there was enough, let's say, appreciation of it from the divisional management that young engineers like myself could bring forward some exciting project like that, and you could get some levels of approval to go ahead and do them. That would just meant that the people who were responsible for running it appreciated that. Those kinds of things would attract interest from certain areas, and it would relate on our capabilities, technical people, and so we did that. I remember the fun we had in developing the turbocharged Jetfire. That was extremely interesting. Yeah, that was very extremely nice. I went up Pikes Peak 100 times in a row with that, trying to get the altitude performance to work out. And we did some high performance demonstration things for our agency. Seemed like it was down at Chimney Rock and some of that sort of thing. And so we had all of those years many interesting, as I say, high performance projects that were exemplifying our expertise. We did an all-wheel drive turbocharged all aluminum V8 Can-Am car back in the 70s. It was a dynamite car. It was terribly fast. We didn't have enough brakes on it, but it was like a rocket sled with no parachute. We couldn't get enough brakes on it. It was a little bit of design error in the chassis, and so we had a race car company do that for us, and we couldn't get that totally resolved before the project kind of gave away. But everybody appreciated it. It was the fastest thing around. And the last one I did was the world record. It's on the wall over there. That was a fun project. This car, yeah. That was 600 horsepower per liter.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah, that is remarkable. And we didn't use it all. We could have went a lot faster. If I'd have been around, I would have run it a few more times. It still holds the world record.
Take us back and share with us how that got started, and if you can go kind of through that.
Well, it was interesting, as the just before the reorganization was getting going, I was instrumental in trying to find a replacement for the rocket V8. We could see that the demise of the big V8s was coming, and we felt it important that Oldsmobile have an engine of some substance to replace that. So I started a little skunk work group to try to analyze what the hell should we do. And we looked at all kinds of architecture and all kinds of trade-offs. We put a matrix of wishes and ways to accomplish them together. And we finally decided that with an extremely efficient four-cylinder engine, with as tight a packaging as we could possibly do, and with as large a displacement we dared to venture into to be within the envelope of four-cylinder shaking disturbances that we could handle, that we could come up with the most flexible engine in terms of performance and fuel economy and packaging possible. And so that said, of course, it had to have multi-valve and had to have very low friction and had to have a lot of modern technology that hadn't been done in the corporation before. So we embarked upon that. And then that was being kicked off in about concept-wise in about 1982
Okay,
in that era.
all right.
We had the first running, let's say, demonstration prototype in the early part of 1983, and we clearly demonstrated that the idea and the concept was doable. We built out of a billet, we built a 4-valve head, and we put it on an Opal 2-liter block. We were able to establish the objectives that we had set up in terms of specific horsepower and specific fuel consumption, and the characteristics of the engine would meet our objectives. And then I went into a long-term fight with a corporation trying to get approval for a production engineering project. In the meantime, we were sort of bootlegging it.
They weren't appreciative.
Oh, it was a very big struggle because there was a competitive 4-cylinder concept being put forward by CPC to replace the old Iron Duke.
Yeah.
And they had little to no data that said that what their project was going to be superior to ours, but we had to justify it. And there wasn't a lot of love and a lot of circles for doing a 4-cylinder anyway. And of course, everything can't be done by a 4-cylinder. All the aspects are not totally resolvable, but if you wanted flexibility in terms of efficiency and power, that was the best package. It still is.
Yeah.
And
plus it fits in all the cars.
yeah, and the idea was that the transverse width of that would fit in just about everything we could possibly make. And we had at the same time a concept for a family of 6s and 8s, and so that we'd have share same components in these. We built a quad 8.
Oh.
Later on, there was a quad 6 built, and they're very, very good engines. And so anyway, as that finally got approved and it was headed for production, I thought that we should demonstrate something about that engine, make it something that would catch the eye of the public. And I said, well, what we need is a glamorous show car, something that's dynamite looking, but it's a real engineering endeavor, that it really is aerodynamically important, and it does things. And in the meantime, we'll come up with a way to really horse some horsepower out of this thing. And so we started a parallel project. Design staff, the guys were working in a little secret room designing that body. And we had the aerodynamicists working to come up with the right concepts. The tunnels underneath are very important, as well as the low drag characteristics. And in the meantime, we had a couple of our people that have worked with me before on special engine projects trying to come up with a couple of concepts to really raise the horsepower level where we could target it for setting a lap record in Indianapolis is what we were targeting.
That was your goal.
I wanted to set it at over 235 miles an hour, so we had a target of 850 horsepower, and the characteristics of the chassis in terms of cornering force and low drag were all computerized, and we knew we were able to do that.
Were we doing basically thing in-house?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I had some outside people working with it, a small group of engineers overseeing it. Yeah. It was an Oldsmobile project. It was ours. And nobody else can take credit for it. And unfortunately, because of politics and weather and some other things, we never got to run hard at Indianapolis. So we had to find a place that would allow us to attack the world's closed course record, which Mercedes held. And we found Fort Stockton was a very similar track to the one they ran. Not exactly similar, the same distance around that the Mercedes had run at Nardo in Italy, only that was a high bank track. Okay. This is a flat track. So it made it a little more challenging. But anyway, we got down there and we were able to break the record sufficiently.
Why did you pick Floyd?
Well, AJ was a friend of mine, and there was no doubt about his driving ability. He's still the best there is. And when you're going to put somebody into something like that, you want experience and ability, because they're going to be doing something very different. And it wasn't a few laps around there. We knew we were going to be able to go fast enough. It was just a matter of getting some details worked out. And at the last minute, we decided to go for a flying mile, which meant we had to go the opposite direction around this track. And needless to say, the car was built for one direction for G-forces. We couldn't pick up the fuel, and so we had to really make a last-minute couple of adjustments, keep the fuel topped up, and a couple of quick runs the opposite way. But he was going through the straightaway in one direction, 290 plus. We were able to go much faster. We never ran the full horsepower.
How did he feel about that?
Oh, he was very, very enthusiastic. He likes to own the world's record,
Oh,
just
sure.
like we do.
Yeah.
So that was a nice kind of one of my departing extra endeavors.
How did, well, you had to get some money from somewhere.
Yeah,
How did
I
the
got
corp
it. I
feel
went
about
to,
that?
well, the corp didn't have to be involved. I went
Okay.
to our new general manager at that time, who was, oh, he was a guy from South America. Why can't I remember
Oh,
his
that's
name?
Sanchez.
Sanchez.
Joe Sanchez.
And Joe appointed me as chief engineer, and very shortly after, I wanted to tell him what I had in mind. I said, "This is extraordinary, but I know we can do it. I know technically we can do it. It's going to be glamorous. It's going to be exciting. It's going to bring out the typical strong technical heritage of your company." He said, "Go for it," and set a budget aside for it, and
Okay.
we did it.
We didn't have to get the Detroit boys involved at all.
Well, no, I mean the general manager had some discretion to use his funds as he saw fit, just like we always did to support racing and NASCAR and drag racing. And of course, I oversaw that stuff for many years. We were very successful at those things.
Now, we made 2 of these vehicles, didn't we?
Yeah, we made 2. One was like this one, which was pretty much the original design, which was intended really for extremely high cornering forces and running at Indianapolis. Then we decided that on a longer track, we could improve the aerodynamics for the long tail version. So we did. And we had 2 specific engine programs so that we'd make sure that we didn't have a failure in one and not be able to do it.
Yeah.
And they both were both were successful. They both are involved in those records.
The engine itself, uh,
There's a
how,
picture of it right there.
how was it basically different than the knockoff?
Well, the criteria I gave them, it had to be exact same architecture. That means it had to have the same bore spacing, the same deck height, the same crank stroke. We had to reduce the bore a little bit because the bore walls for this extremely high combustion pressures were a little bit too flexible. So we had to go down just under 2 liters.
Oh, yeah.
So we gave up some displacement. And of course, the combustion chamber was the same as production. We had some slight variations in the porting, but most of it was a matter of engineering the materials and strength for running the horsepower up. And we ran at about 3 bars of turbocharger pressure. So we were really getting some high pressure air in there. So, but the efficiency of the combustion chamber was well demonstrated. The idea of a very strong, compact little block being taken to these high levels of stress was well demonstrated. Our ability to move air in this porting arrangement and this characteristic was well demonstrated. Nobody's been able to move air any better than that. That's what makes horsepower. So anyway, that was those are kind of extracurricular things. I took just as much pleasure in doing all the evaluations of our vehicles, ride handling, pleasability, all the aspects in terms of controls, ergonomics, comfort, air conditioning, all of that. And unfortunately, as we in the last few years had to have our cars engineered by different engineering groups, it was always a fight to get them to understand the kinds of things that I felt important that could separate us, even to the simplest things, like where in the hell do you put the air conditioning outlet? It's not in the bottom of the instrument panel at the top, because cold air doesn't want to go up, it wants to go down. You know, simplest little things about how we used to maintain our standards of performance, and it just got to be more and more frustrating because others didn't understand all those little details.
Did Oldsmobile basically have what I call an image that they tried to portray in design and styling and so on and handling?
Yeah, we always, for instance, in terms of performance, we always wanted a balance between good handling and high performance. We wouldn't go just nothing but a muscle car that you couldn't turn a corner with.
Yeah.
We always tried to maintain the best possible combination of cornering, handling, control that we possibly could. We tried awfully hard to keep high standards in brake performance in terms of fade, stopping distance. And that was just reflected in the way we wanted to do things. We were aiming to be the best we knew how. And the leadership of the company wouldn't set a standard that was going to be looking for mediocrity. Because the minute you strive for something less than you can possibly do, less than the best you can do, you'll come in last, not third or second. And that's just the nature of our business. And I think we've been taught some terrible lessons in that by wanting to watch what other people do and emulate them. Because by the time you do what they've done, they're doing something else. The only way to be a leader is to look beyond what people are doing and set standards no one has heard of before. And if you can reach them, then they'll be chasing you. And if you can't, at least you'll be in the front of the pack. And that's very much to my, I think, to the credit of the company in the past. I think that's something that we'd like to see reinstated for that. And you can't, you start with leadership, and you start with leadership wanting to take you there, and then the customer finds it out, and you're rewarded. That's the way business ought to work. Mm-hmm. You give the customer the best possible value and the best possible product, and you'll have success.
In the earlier days, Ted, did we gather what I call the customer perceptions and try and figure out what they want?
Well, I wasn't well organized. I started the first product planning department. Mm-hmm. We were in the old traditional way. The really good chief engineers and general managers kind of had their fingers on this and led us that way. They were very close to their customers, and it was maybe a simpler world then than now. We didn't have such a diverse array of products and such a diverse market. But we think we understood what we were, and we kept trying to do that the best we possibly could. And the customers, we developed then a customer clientele that were looking for what we did. Everybody made their niche by trying to be good at what they did. Those were signs of great success. And
for some reason,
we had some variant. John Beltz had a real sense of new ideas and subtle ways of finding product niches. He was a good leader, and then that was the kind of thing that we were not organized so formally as you see today with research and product planning. You need it today. I'm not trying to put it down. I think it's very desirable. But those things were done in a less, let's say, recognizable, sophisticated way, but they were being done by our management.
And it was more of a management flavor, understanding of what we were trying to be.
Yeah, and continuing to follow that. Knowing the flavor of what you're trying to do and reproduce it and keep raising it up to the modern times and to the new levels of expectancy in terms of performance, styling, and all.
Sure.
Yeah, it wasn't stupid luck. Far from that. We had a heritage of very sound, durable, reliable cars. We got into some interesting innovations in terms of products on the market, and we had a heritage of some interesting ways of having what I'd call tasteful styling. We never were off on the deep end. We were out there in the forefront with the good lasting kind of appearance styling that would stand the test of time.
People out there that
well, we always thought that we provided to a car that had a great combination of appearance, high performance, reliability, and durability. And we let that speak for itself.
Whoever, so to speak, wanted that here.
We were trying to create a product that would develop its own market segment. I think that would be the way to put it, with strong attributes. And we weren't looking for your father's Oldsmobile. We weren't looking for necessarily all young people. Only you recall in the 60s, we had a very deliberate campaign to reestablish ourselves with young people with high performance, and we did. We had high performance all along, but we hadn't made such an advertising effort to identify it, and we complemented that with Dr. Oldsmobile and all kinds. And at that time, that was big thing, you know, everybody hot into drag racing concepts and muscle cars, and you had to make some noise. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I was very much involved in the Hearst Olds thing. So George Hearst and Jack Watson were good friends of mine, and we had done a lot of interesting projects, including the Harry Oldsmobile. You remember that
Oh,
one?
sure.
And we wanted to somehow or other get around the corporate ban on the engine size. That's how we came up with that idea. We put together a car and put a big engine in it. Of course, we got John Demmer, who was still a great friend of mine, to be the cover for it. And we had a place out there where we could put the paint stripes on and put the shifters in. But pretty much all done in-house except for that, and put the cover of the Hearst Olds name on it so that we wouldn't get accused of stuffing that big engine in there, which we did. That was a fun project. And oh, that was typical of the way, you know, the organization was close-knit, and we could do things like that. Between the general manager and the chief engineer and a few people, you could pull off those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And of course, the manufacturing guys were just like us, you know, they wanted to make it happen too.
Sure.
It was a pain in the ass to them, but they did, you know, because that's what we needed to do. And another thing I want to reflect on is it just absolutely amazes me and amuses me in a way to see in the last 15 or so years all of this remarkable discovery of simultaneous engineering. We had no idea that you weren't supposed to do that. Absolutely couldn't believe it. If we didn't have Larry Lennon over from manufacturing on every project, when we first got the first ideas down, we wouldn't even do it, you know. The guys would just trot over and we'd talk about it and they'd start thinking how they wanted to do it. And it was simultaneous engineering. We couldn't do it any other way.
But we didn't know what to call it.
We didn't know what to call it. We thought we had to do
That
it.
was just the way we did business.
And now they reinvented it. Isn't that marvelous? And in the meantime, the organizations have made it almost impossible. You don't have the guys with your own fabrication plant. You don't have the guys out there making your engine. You don't have the guys out there stamping the sheet metal. Who the hell do you talk to? It's very difficult to have simultaneous engineering if you're not organized in such a way that you're related to each other.
So that was one of the values of having all of that together in one
A
part.
car division was a car division. That meant you made your own things, you engineered your own things, and the guys who made them, the guys that engineered them, and the guys that sold them were all together, and it was cohesive. Now that's not to say that it could be done as simply and as easily in a bigger organization like it is today, but frankly, we were selling 600,000 cars back in the early 60s and 1 million cars in the 70s, and we were able to do it. And it seems like there's a possible solution.
Selling 500,000.
Mm-hmm. From 5 different engineering departments who are all going to make their opinion on what an Oldsmobile is.
What do we can come out with on an Oldsmobile in that fashion?
And everyone makes their interpretation, and you don't have a clout from the general manager or the chief engineer to override it. So,
How about, you talked about John Belts, we've had to deal with a lot of general managers over the years.
Mhm.
Can you share with us insights into those individuals?
well, of course, I came there when Jack Wolfram was chief engineer when I first started, and he went on to be general manager. He was rather an interesting person. He certainly was very, what you may say, autocratic and opinionated. And he had his own flair about it. And I think there were probably some successes. And Harold Metzel followed him as chief engineer, and I thought he was a good sound engineer. He loved cars, loved to drive them. We had, let's see now, I'm trying to think who followed him. Then John Belts was the next chief engineer after Harold, and he was the next general manager also. I think they were both good chief engineers and general managers, sound.
Did you see any change in what I call the method of operation or the management style in those individuals?
No, not drastic. not so drastic. John was had a little more charisma and more flamboyance about it from the public side.
All right.
But as far as an engineer, both those guys were sound, excellent engineering managers and knew the market, knew our company very well, and tended to follow the heritage very closely as far as I'm concerned. And then let's see, after John, we had
Howard Carroll.
Howard. And of course, Howard, he didn't have the strong Oldsmobile heritage. He came from Chevrolet over to us and had a few years as assistant chief engineer before he moved up. And there was some differences I saw in
Between
his opinion of how to operate. He was extremely conservative and wanted to not be at all daring or take a technical risk or chance, much less than we had seen in the past, and was much more inclined to prefer low performance, rather benign type things. And he didn't want any he didn't want any four barrel carburetors. He wanted them all 2-barrel. He wanted everything simple. And we just, I think some of those things began to chip it away at what would have been traditional for us. He was a very good person. I like him and technically very sound, but he was very conservative. And that was a change in style, certainly. And let's see, after him, we had Baker, who died very quickly. I was just hardly seeing come and see. And he was hardly got to be known. And then of course, Bob Cook, who was truly an old hard Oldsmobile person. He knew both sides of the camp pretty well. And he followed the tradition very well. Somehow, I think, very well. He was open-minded and listened to his subordinates and the experts in the various departments. And Bob was, of course, much more inclined to be to cater to the historical customers rather than new. It was a little bit hard for him to see dramatic styling changes. He was quite hard for him to see that part, not other things. He was advanced thinking and good methods and good processes, good engineering type things. He would be open to that. But the styling guys had some frustration because he was so conservative that we had many styling cues that they would have liked to modernize quicker. And Bob was a little reluctant to that. He was not comfortable with it. He tried, but it was not comfortable. For instance, he'd hang on to typical living room plush seat designs when the market was kind of moving away from it. Some of those things he was a little conservative on. So we saw, but he was certainly ran a successful ship. And it was
mother had the entire year.
Oh yeah, he did it well. He related well. I think he related reasonably well with our dealers and our marketing and salespeople, and of course that's another thing that, as I look back over the years, we always had close relationships with the sales and marketing organization from engineering. They would come to us. They would find out what the hell we were doing and why, and they would use that in the way they would market. And that was a good strong point that other divisions didn't use as well, I don't think.
Would they come to you also and say, hey, there's this thing out here that we want to aim a vehicle at?
Yeah, we communicated on those
That
kind
way,
of things.
was
Yeah,
both ways,
yeah,
a two-way thing.
But generally speaking, you see, we had general managers and chief engineers who were so in tune with that they didn't need very much of that. But there would be occasions they would see something somebody else had, and we talk about it, see what we could do, whether it be a paint scheme or that sort of thing.
After Cook left, we talked about Joe Sanchez, came along after Cook.
Yeah, Joe would have been extremely successful with us. It was just a tragedy that he got moved on to Saturn and then had that heart attack. Matter of fact, I was there the night they called me over there because I had a heart attack, so I had some experience trying to help the family out a little bit. Yeah, he was a person that could have adopted he seemed to grasp it so quickly that what used to be so important to us and how we should maybe take advantage of it. I could see that moving along very well. Then he went off to, and of course, his reputation in the corporation had been very good in overseas. And I think he could have been very timely for the organization if he'd have been around a little longer, just not long enough to make an impact.
See, and then Bill Lane
Yeah, Bill Lane.
followed,
Yeah.
but now we were kind of basically the marketing.
Well, at that point in time, they had reorganized, and Bill Lane was a salesperson, and that's all he knew or could do. And no, I got along fine with Bill, except that it was just a different job. That's all.
Yeah.
And different. His main concern was advertising, marketing, and sales, and he spent almost all of his time in those venues.
And the engineering side of the house at that juncture that you were in was entirely different.
Well, I tried to keep it as close to what we used to, and I was bucking the trend. The corporation didn't want that, and the other engineering departments didn't want it. But I insisted on being strong chief engineer. When I wrote a car and I said it wasn't right, and I wanted that damn right handling done, and I went out with their development engineers till they got it right. And if the axle ratio and performance shift points weren't right, I would tell them those kinds of things. And I was very insistent upon trying to maintain, let's say, the product attributes that we had laid out in our requirements. And it was a struggle. And I'll never forget the remarkable experience I had with the Sierra. Right after the reorganization had been made, we had developed a ride package with the CPC organization on that we felt was acceptable. It wasn't perfect, but it was in the venue of what we wanted. Then it got in production, and it was not a thing like it.
Really?
They released somebody else's package because it was the same as somebody else's, and it was a goddamn disaster. We fought it all the way back. We had to get out all the part numbers, discover what the hell they had put in the car, and get it re-released. And it didn't get hardly done till the end of the year. It was that type of thing. What a frustration.
But
Yeah, those kinds of things certainly were lending themselves to frustration. I mean, you wanted so bad to have your products be what they're intended to be, and it was like fighting an uphill battle. Even the dumb things. You know, we had a lot of pressures on taking cost out hours, and little things like we would eliminate some little emblem or something. We couldn't get an emblem left off a car for a whole year. Just say, don't put it on, just leave it in the box.
Yeah.
We couldn't get that done for a whole year because they refused to accept our late release to take it off, even though it was how frustrating. I mean, it was stupidity. It was the dog, the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah. Back in the old days, we just called the guy.
I went down there and said, hey, can you guys start taking those off tomorrow, and we won't get any more, and purchasing would quit buying them. We'd make that money and put it in the bank. It's dumb.
Maybe share
The whole level of bureaucracy that became just rolled upside down as a result of the reorganization. There was, even though there was gigantic bureaucracy in General Motors, if you'd been there a long time, who was people could get around it? Who were the people that knew how to get things done? If you wanted something done at Fisher Body, you know how. If you wanted something done here or there. But after it was reorganized, all of that unofficial structure went away. And so nobody knows how anything was to get done, and it wasn't getting done. So, and that, I'm sure that everybody had good intentions, but they weren't in the same job, didn't have the same responsibility. How could they do it?
Yeah.
So that was sort of ending up with a level of frustration, and the frustration wasn't just personal. It was, frustration for our company.
So, reorganization.
Well, I hope it should be better. I interface in the General Motors now as a supplier, And you'd like it to quit changing so you could at least find out, what share you get when the music stops. But the speed of reaction, the speed of ability of decision making and doing things is got a long ways to go yet. And I hope that this reorganization will help that.
Can you take us back again in time and maybe discuss how the foreign competition thing happened, so to speak, and how you saw that back in the earlier days?
Well, of course, it came in some waves in the earlier days. Back in the 60s, there was some niche market for low price small cars that frankly General Motors didn't care about.
Yeah.
And the domestic market didn't care about. It wasn't that big a market. And that was their foothold. They didn't make very good cars then either.
Okay.
They learned how, and they damn well learned their lesson. And they just kept working up market, finding weaknesses of our own by making well-targeted, high-quality, good-cost products. And of course, for many years, the Japanese had not the Europeans, they weren't going to kill us, but I mean, the era of the Beetle did.
Sure.
That was, that had its place. But their idea of making a better product lends its credence to what I told you before, because they made them better, and they let the product earn its way in the marketplace. They had a large advantage pre-80s after when the yen-dollar relationship was so favorable for them. That was a big factor. They don't have financial leverage factor on their products now, and it's beginning to show in the marketplace. But they are good, and they make good stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, the only way you beat them is to be better.
Right.
And we can be better cost-wise now, and in some respects, at least equal.
Was it obvious that something was happening back in the earlier days, or were we just kind of poo-pooing it?
Well, I don't think that we had a good wake-up call until after we had been through some of the energy shocks and got into the early 80s.
All right.
We were seeing that, hey, this is serious business.
Yeah.
And I must say that Oldsmobile, we were dumb and insulated too, because we were going through such great success at a time when other things were happening. And I don't think we were paying as much attention to the attributes and market segments they were working on as we should have. You certainly see that now as they have eroded into the mid-sized market where we owned that at that time.
Yeah.
So we were not, I don't think, of paying as much attention to it. And when I started the planning group, I was beginning to wake up to that as I got better understanding what they were doing.
Okay. You must have, on your car evaluations, had evaluations of all these.
Yeah, we
vehicles.
generally did, but unfortunately for Oldsmobile, many of them were not directly in our market, so we didn't do as much with it as we should have perhaps.
Okay.
And they've now moving into everybody's market,
Sure,
so they have to. And we always did make good competitive evaluations, and as long as we had control of our product, we always felt good that we were trying to stay at the forefront. And where we weren't, we had a project in to try and get there.
How about Tornado, Ted? Were you?
Oh yeah, I was involved in that. I was, matter of fact, I wrote a paper on that was published in the GM Engineering Journal about the test program, which I was sort of in charge of. We had a big test program, hundreds of cars. And I think it proved that a good engineering job, fully tested, could meet its objectives first day out, because that car was technically a success. We didn't have any major problems with it the first year out.
Were we, the test program that you had, share with us what kinds of things that you.
Oh, we did everything in terms of the standard tests, in terms of durability and development that we did for everything else. And we invented a lot of special ones in terms of evaluating the differential characteristics of how the customer would handle emergencies with front wheel drive, what were the kinds of things they'd be concerned about for failures that might be different, the breaking of the rear springs, the loss of steering. We went through everything we could imagine to try and think of the worst case possible thing that could happen to this very different kind of mechanism to us. And so we had a vast array of evaluations of trying to make sure we understood the characteristics about a front-wheel drive car that might cause us concern.
How about what, do you have any upfront knowledge on what precipitated the tornado?
Well, we had an advanced design group who would, come up with some whole bunch of different kinds of powertrain and transmission and drive packages and suspension packages. And they had considered that the improved directional stability and improved traction of the front-wheel drive would be an attractive concept. And certainly we all thought so. And
So that was the Andy Watt
and it
bunch?
was Andy Watt bunch, and
definitely.
certainly Belts and Metzel were very enthusiastic about it. And they exactly how they wrestled it through corporate approval at that time, I was not at a level to appreciate, but I suppose it was similar to the things I had to go through to get a major program like that. But there was a lot more what I would call individualistic opportunities for divisions in that era, 360s era, when that was started. Because that hit the market in '66, and that project started back in the, in the 1960 time period. And geez, we had a lot of interesting kind of advanced projects at that time. We had transaxles, we had multi-valve engines, we had we had a V6 engine program, we had we had a 4-valve engine, V8 4-valve, and
what happened to those kinds of things?
Well, they were engineering exercises to see what you get from it, what you can do with it. And if the marketplace had been going those directions, we'd have been sort of had technology on the shelf. We were learning about what we needed to have for the future. And now they talk about, developing technology for the shelf. Well, that's what advanced design was doing. It was in-house, and we were doing it. We were looking at unique suspension systems, all kinds of independent suspensions. We were looking at liquid-cooled brakes. We were looking at inboard brakes. We were looking at a whole vast array of things. Remarkable new cooling systems, because at that time we had a hell of a time cooling air-conditioned cars, and I had some patents on different kinds of cooling systems. And the development of the fan clutch was major thing in Oldsmobile. That was a big thing in order for us to get idle cooling. And so there was constantly unique advanced engineering projects going on, so that if the market was headed where those kinds of things could be advantageous, we were ready. We had them. We had automatic lubrication systems. We had, a whole lot of very interesting kinds of projects.
Now, how would that approach then be different from, say, the last few years?
Well, it was getting to the point where advanced project engineering was little more than trying to find some simple solutions to existing problems, not really in the car divisions. It's not really getting the chance to really reach out. I did start a couple of projects when I had the advanced planning and engineering group. Matter of fact, the Fiero concept we originally started and tried to get approval for it, and couldn't get approval for such a concept. And lo and behold, Pontiac picks it up. But that idea of taking the X-car powertrain and packaging it in mid-engine was one that we tried to sell in a small sports car. That should have been more of a success if they had done a better job with the horsepower. It was a nice car. It had its day.
Yeah. When we went through the process of reorganizing and and started to separate the manufacturing and so forth, how did you view that? Was that
Well, I had to be on some of the reorganization committees, and certainly I was trying to be as helpful as I could as to what worked, but what came out didn't seem to be what our committees suggested. So it was rather disappointing to me to see that it ended up as it did.
Was it generally the view that the manufacturing should not be so to speak, a part of the car side of the house?
No,
Manufacturing and design and all that stuff.
No, I think most of us felt they needed to be coordinated together, and to separate them was something still proven to be not particularly advantageous. So anyway, those are some of my feelings and thoughts about our great company.
When did you retire from Oldsmobile?
1988.
88?
Yeah. And that was my 40th year.
Okay.
48 to 88. Mm-hmm.
There's one other thing maybe you can share with us. There was a change in what I will call the engineers over time. When you and I went through, it was all men. And pretty soon we were starting to get some females. And can you share that happenstance at all?
Well, of course, there was in industry in general a lot of pressure for equity and the races and the sexes, and this was just a natural result of that. And by 1988, we had, a handful of product engineering females, and they certainly seemed to be good engineering students, but again, they lacked the basic male experience that young boys had of playing with bikes and cars, and so they had some more difficulty in finding themselves comfortable in the hands-on part of the engineering aspect. It wasn't as natural for them, but I began to see some good ones, and of course you do more and more now.
Did we, as old and Louckes, the interview was held at his office at 1000 North Updike in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Phone number there is area code 313-370-0310. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center on June 17, 1992. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. Special.
Well, certainly I was a part of trying to be cooperative and helpful in hiring the best candidates we could. That was the most important thing to do, because if you don't hire good ones, you're going to have nothing but failures, and that's not going to do anybody any good, that employee nor you. And we tried to do that with the minority racial groups as well as the females. And then once in the organization, we tried to recognize their technical needs and training and tried to provide it the best we could. And certainly we were awfully busy doing our jobs, so you couldn't spend all your time with that, but you tried to make sure they had assignments where they would get adequate experience and be able to function. They had to do that with anyone. So it shouldn't have been remarkably different.
It wasn't significantly different from the guys to the gals, so to speak.
Not significantly. They needed to be trained, they had to have experience, and you had to pay attention to what they could do and couldn't do so that you could help them to develop. And that has to be true with any employee, of course. Most important thing was to hire people that had the potential so that you could have some success for them. Because if you don't do that, then they're going to be unhappy and they think that things are not being done fairly, and that's unfortunate.
Well, maybe one peculiar subject perhaps, but after the million car years and after the reorganization, and you left in there, the volumes and the sales and so forth, they just kind of, well, I'll call it deteriorated. Any views on causes, reasons?
Well, I think some of it is in some of the things I expressed to you in the past, that many of the strengths that we had that were related to our customer base were being hurt. We made some cars that had technical problems we couldn't seem to get resolved. We didn't have control of it. We were no longer trying to engineer them to the standards that we had in our historical past. All those began to show up, and they're out there hurting us. Also, back in the 70s, middle 70s, when we started our planning organization, we could see that we needed revisions on many of our products, and we had come up with many requests for program changes. But our success was also our enemy. The allocation of product program funds and programs that we felt were necessary were given to the hurting divisions, not to the winning one. And it was terribly frustrating for our organization in the last few years to seem to get nothing, and the guys who were hurting were getting as much help as they possibly could, and it hurt us real bad. And
The innovation was going.
we couldn't even get freshening of the simplest styling things, and we were just out there with products that had gone past their time and their life cycle, and we're trying to sell them, and we weren't getting any attributes. We were denied the ability to make variations in performance. We were designed just the corporation viewed us as the sort of the conservative family car, don't need to change anything and just keep doing that, and we didn't get there with that. That was a misconception, and that all helped us down. We got a lot of help for the failures of the last few years. We got a lot of help.
A lot of it outside of our.
Yeah. And control. If you go back and you look at the presentations, the requests, and the studies that said we were going to have this problem that went back into the middle 80s, they were fulfilled because nobody reacted to those. The division knew we had enough people in our organization that knew what we wanted, what we needed, what we had to do, and we couldn't get it. So we fulfilled our predictions.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that certainly was in my mind as I decided to retire. And since I left, Mike Losh there, I think they were beginning to get some breakthroughs on allocation from the corporation to help them, but I'm not close enough to it to know how successful that what they wanted was versus what they got.
Perhaps share with us, Ted, what maybe was your best boss? Who he was, she was?
Well, the best person I worked for closely. Let's see. Probably John Belts was the guy who I would want to emulate the most, who I had to appreciate the most. Good engineer, good charismatic leader, had a real sense of what our customer wanted. There were a lot of very fine people that I worked with and for. Al Baker, Lowell Koenig, Bob Dorshemer, Gilbert Burrow. Those are all excellent, really top-notch people in their particular areas of expertise. Now we had some real talent.
What about the best project?
Oh gosh. Well, I love the turbocharged jet fire. Of course, I love the Quad 4 project. That was a really my own brainchild, and I really loved that.
Mm-hmm.
The Tornado was fun. The Hearst Olds projects were fun. Many of the special performance projects, like working with the racing people and all that, were great fun. The most enjoyable single job I ever had was being proving ground manager. God, that was just it was just everything an engineer would want, you know. You had cars at your disposal that you could evaluate, drive, and you were in on everything that was on its wheels. And it was a great place out there. That was fun. And working at the Desert Proving Grounds was also similar.
We didn't talk much about the racing thing, probably outside of our production vehicles. Anything there that you could share with us, Ted?
Well, NASCAR guys are always fun to be around there. Kind of bullheaded, hard to get anything technical through to them, but they're fun to be around. I was excited. Drag racing was another venue that I was successful at, and we helped people the right way, and we could help them. And then the special ones like the road car racing and the Can-Ams and things like special projects like Pikes Peak Hill Climb, and those were all very exciting. Learned a lot from them. We learned about some things about a car that couldn't possibly, as an engineer, learn in the passenger car environment. I mean, you get out there and do some things that.
Did any of that help us in any of our actual work, design work?
Well, I can tell you this, that any engineers that knew the outer limits of the dynamics of a vehicle would appreciate better what's going on when they're doing the regular passenger car evaluations. And matter of fact, one of the things I did after I got to be chief engineer, I took all the engineers I could and I sent them to high performance driving training so they would know what vehicle dynamics are at the extreme. And then they would appreciate the difference between understeer, oversteer, balance, tire loading, why a vehicle acts as it does, what the weight transfers do, and how you can control it, what the damping has to do with wheel control and all that sort of thing. And they better understood how to get a car out at the advanced level of ride and handling. You can't find it out if you're back where you used to be. You know, you got to go past that.
The Kmart parking lot, you don't learn
Oh,
much. Did all that racing activity, Ted, we basically, I'm gonna call funded it, and did that budget, how was that viewed, so to speak?
Oh, it came and it went, depending on corporate philosophy at the time. You know, it was a time when it was totally bootlegged, when General Motors was absolutely against any involvement in high performance racing, and our General Motors found a way that we could somehow take out of the engineering budget, carefully find a way to help a few selected people. It varied. Never completely out of it. We, for a while, for instance, were only involved in such things as the parallel performance trials and those kinds of things. But from that, we made some other little efforts. And that was kind of an interesting thing. We won that a few times. That was very clever how you had to go about that.
How did we do that?
Well, you had to know ways that got around the rules, frankly, because if you did it exactly as it said, you couldn't even come close. You couldn't possibly come close. There was some terrible, outrageous deviations of rules that were going on there. Was how clever people were. Matter of fact, Pontiac got in big trouble because they had some people disguise some fuel, extra fuel in a car.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was a big scandal. Their fuel economy was so outrageous that finally somebody took it all apart and they found they had a hidden fuel tank. Yeah.
Where there's a will, there's a way, I guess.
Well, you know, you didn't have to completely break. You had to know how to find the loopholes, and you had to be very clever to be good at that, because the performance of those cars was outrageous. I mean, we had engines that were, 11-to-1 compression ratios and all kinds of things that, you couldn't sell. Sure as hell helped the performance and fuel economy. You had to go through them and blueprint them and take all the friction out. You had to very carefully contour the tires, and had to do a lot of very, very careful things to be good.
That's great.
Yeah, there's so many of those things in 40 years, it's hard to even begin to jump out at you. But the whole organization worked with, we had great competence in the manufacturing side. We were leaders in the application of plastics. You can go back to the old rocket engine plant back in 1948 and you see statistical process control, and you saw dimensional tolerance control and things that, God, you wonder where in the hell that all went. And that was a precision engine in its day, and it paid off. People forgot those things. And General Motors in general, was so good in manufacturing engineering. Nobody came close to them now. Geez, I mean, they're last in line. They're last in line. Well, you have to decide first that you want to be innovative and be first.
That's true.
There's a lot of people who want to be second. They want to wait till somebody else proves it. They don't want to take the risk of trying it. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think that's terrible. But you'll always be catch up. You have no chance to be the first with the most. And that's very much true in that. Mm-hmm.
I remember when we were getting the million car years, we were thinking, yeah, we were almost going to catch Ford. We're going to get by that.
Yeah, that was the glory days. Well, I hope they come back, and I certainly be very interested in what this all is, this history, because it's dear to me, biggest part of my life.
Sure.
I'm sure you found that was true with other people you've talked to.
Well, do you think?
You know, it's a shame. I don't think there are very many companies, corporations, or anything left in the United States where that feeling can be engendered anymore. Employees will not ever get that.
Think it's gone forever?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't think they think of it as a part of their family and their life anymore. It's a job. They don't see it as the future is not likely to be a comfortable retirement. They don't see any of these things anymore. The whole attitude of the company is, of big companies and industry in general in America, is to survive for itself, and the employees are just mechanisms in it. Well, you see it every day, don't you? Yeah, there isn't any attachment. They don't create an atmosphere that will create that engender it in people. I don't think. It's too bad.
Must have been a very big happy family or something.
Well, we weren't unhappy, but we were a good one, and most of the time we were. I mean, your family at home wouldn't be happy every day either. They were going to argue and fight, but they were a family, and it works. And a company needs some of that. They need something more than an employee who is there to see how he can achieve his personal goals. And if his personal goals are better somewhere else, he'll very readily leave. That would not have been the case in the past. You wouldn't have lured anybody away. They wouldn't even have thought about it.
Would you ever thought of it?
No, I wouldn't have possibly thought. I wanted to be there. I wanted to succeed there. And if I left, it was a failure. I mean, I didn't succeed there, so I wouldn't be what I wanted to do. And I was doing it because I thought that the success of the company was my personal success. That's what we were working for.
Was that what QWL was? You remember QWL?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's was the best part. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope you have a lot of fun with this. I'm glad I can help you. Mm-hmm. Put it in the bank.